Good morning, it's April 8th, and this is To My Liberal Friends. Democracy is dying. We're at a crossroads on democracy. We've heard Democrats and their friends in the media tell us over and over that Trump's a threat to democracy. This theme was repeated by former President Barack Obama in a recent speech at Hamilton College. I would also remind you that Obama got paid a hefty fee to make that speech, so you can be sure he was just feeding the audience red meat so they would feel justified in paying his speaking fee. But according to Obama, he says, quote, "It's up to all of us to fix this. It's not important to be because somebody comes and saves you. The most important office in this democracy is a citizen, the ordinary person who says, no, that's not right," end quote. Now, that's a lot of hubris from the so-called leader of the Democratic Party, which ignored every principle of democracy in selecting their past candidate for the presidency. But what he was really saying had nothing to do with democracy. It was another pitch for the major Democratic theme of DEI. Again, quoting his speech, "For most of human history, and to this day, in most places in the world, there is a cost to challenging the powers that be, particularly if they're abusing that power. And this idea, I've noticed is among some wealthier folks who, after George Floyd, they were right there and a bunch of companies were talking about how they cared about diversity. And they want to do this and they were all for that. And they're mute right now. But that tells me it was okay when it was cool and trendy, but it's not so much. And I think that each of us has to examine our own hearts," end quote. That's just DEI stuff all over. And later in the speech, he said the following, quote, "What that means is that I can support one candidate instead of another, and I don't have to worry about the police are coming to harass me or my customers. That's what's happening in other places," end quote. Now that's a lot of hubris. If I recall, it was under Democratic President Joe Biden that the police and other federal law enforcement officers were looking at people for simply showing up at a school board meeting to express their displeasure with some of the curriculum being taught their children and questioning why schools were staying closed during COVID. It was those parents that had to worry about the police showing up at their door. In reality, democracy was not something Democrats were counting on because last November the public voted, and it was not a good thing for Democrats. Donald Trump, whether you like him or not, won the election despite being called a racist, a fascist, a dictator, a Nazi, a bigot, and a whole host of other names. He won the Electoral College by winning all the so-called swing states, and then followed that up by winning the popular vote, something that Republican candidates have struggled to do with a number of voters in the large blue states of California, New York, and Illinois. But when you talk about democracy and protecting freedoms, we enjoy Democrats, as well as the legacy media in this country, undermine the very principle of democracy for the 4 years of the Biden presidency. It was apparent from the very beginning that Joe Biden was mentally and physically declining at a rapid rate, and yet he was protected by a small group of aides and media refused to cover this story. Just as they refused to cover the Hunter Biden laptop story and the origin of COVID story, they engaged in a complicit cover-up of an aging president who could no longer perform the tasks of being the leader of the nation and the free world. Now, how's that for destroying democracy? And the irony of all this is that they're now out of power, and some of these insiders from the White House are trying to cash in, and books are being written about how fragile and weak Joe Biden really was during those 4 years. We've read stories that even in 2021, his first year as president, it is reported that schedules had to be adopted and adapted to because he had good days and bad days. Who was destroying democracy then? It's damning that these books are coming out after the fact, and that's according to Phil Wegman, a White House correspondent. He said in an interview, "These aides who are duplicitous might have thought they were protecting the president from the public, but what this shows, they did not respect him enough to think he actually needed all of his faculties to do the job. The implication is they just wanted him there in office to prevent Donald Trump or to be a figurehead so they could do whatever they wanted in his name. It's pretty gross in retrospect," end quote. Is it democracy to be complicit in this charade? Was a clear definition of institutional Washington coalescing around the Democratic Party and thwarting any real attempt of democracy? Nobody was allowed to report on Biden's true condition. Is it democracy when the leaders of the Democratic Party force one candidate out of the race and anoint another who has never shown they can win a national election? Was it right for Pelosi and Obama, who says we're losing to democracy, to participate in this palace coup? So the next time you hear liberals say that the current administration is a threat to democracy, you should ask them those questions and watch them get a befuddled look on their face. They will then immediately go into their latest rant about Donald Trump because that's all they have today. They have no policies, they have nothing else, and democracy is not being challenged. It's out there because the people voted. It's been Two My Liberal Friends. Thanks for listening.